Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining our Educator QuestCast. I'm sorry for the delay. We had a couple of technical difficulties, but I'm really happy to have you all here today. I would like to introduce myself. My name is Rachel Fishbein. I am a program manager for QuestBridge, and I work out of our satellite office in New York City. And now the rest of the panelists are going to introduce themselves, starting with Chat.
Hi, everybody. My name is Chat Leonard. I'm the Director of College Counseling at Metro Academic and Classical High School in St. Louis. That's a mouthful. It's a magnet school, small magnet school, very diverse. We have a full IB diploma program, and 40% of our students qualify for free and reduced lunch.
Hi everyone, I'm Daniel Nasani. I graduated from Northwestern University as a Quest Scholar there, and I'm currently a math teacher at Brooklyn Technical High School in New York City, a specialized high school for students in the city.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jessica Cho. I'm an Associate Director of Undergraduate Admissions and Director of Multicultural Recruitment for Columbia University in the city of New York. We have 2 undergraduate colleges, Columbia College and the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. Our office oversees applications for both, and we are a proud partner school of QuestBridge.
Excellent, thank you. So we're going to get started. We have a number of questions that we populated, actually many from the questions@questbridge.org email address, and then also from the educator survey that we have taken in the past. We also have an opportunity for you to ask questions. They come up on the side of your screen. If there's a question that you see that you are interested in hearing the answer to as well, you can click on the +1, and that will help raise the questions up a little bit higher. If you start the broadcast late, you can always look at it on our YouTube later on. Everybody is going to have the opportunity to answer all of the questions. Any questions that we do not get the opportunity to answer if we run out of time, you can email us at educator@questbridge.org. So to start with the first question, how are teacher recommendations viewed in the admissions process, and what can teachers do to write strong letters for their students? Chet, why don't you start with that one?
Well, I know that Jessica knows, coming from a private university, that, based upon holistic admissions, that recommendations are very, very important. So I want to respond to how teachers can write strong recommendations for their students. Please ask for student input. It's very important. Colleges don't want to hear or read a bunch of filler about activities. Teachers should write about things that are relevant in the classroom. So I encourage my students to give teachers 2 to 3 examples of information to support this letter, because it's a really important letter. And you shouldn't expect a teacher to remember everything, because teachers have a lot on their plates and they're writing for a number of students. So, give your teachers information about and this is not limited to a paper you wrote, a project you worked on, a topic you researched in class, a discussion you led, a book or an article that you read, what excited you, what challenged you, what you got out of it, and then hopefully this will help the teachers and help them write a really good letter recommendation for you.
Sure, and I guess from the admissions standpoint, each piece of the application can serve a pretty distinct function. All of it will come together to tell us more about the student and how he or she might add to our campus community. But I think teachers are able to provide unique light on how that student functions with others, how that student thrives in that particular environment. Will provide information that a transcript could never tell us, that a student might not see about himself or herself. So I think those particular anecdotes on how that student developed, what really makes that student's curiosity peak, but again, just providing information that we would not otherwise see from maybe the student's perspective or from the other academic components, including the transcript or any testing or any quantitative reflection on the student.
Daniel, as a new teacher, you might not have too much of a perspective on this, but when you were thinking about applying to college a couple of years ago, what were you thinking about when you asked your teacher to write recommendations for you?
Sure. So when I was asking teachers to write recommendations for me, I always tried to think about which teachers would be the ones who would be able to tell the best story. So the ones that really got to know me as a student and as a person, they're the ones who are going to be able to write a narrative. And as I'm writing recommendations right now for students, although I don't have much practice with it, I'm always looking to try and tell a story. So there's some type of conflict that happens with the student. They resolve it and grow better from that. And they try to, and they seem like they're going to be a really strong fit because of that. They were able to overcome something. So trying to really show that the student can persevere and go through an obstacle, I think, is important for teachers to show, because students might show that in their essays, but seeing that another person sees that in the student also is something that's, I think, is important.
I think that one of the themes that comes out here is that there are so many different components to the application, but a lot of it has to do very much with the explicit academics, what their grades are, how they are as a writer, and the teacher recommendation, especially from a teacher that knows more than just what the student, how the student is doing in a specific class, can really present a more well-rounded perspective. In terms of, like Jessica said, what the student is involved in, or like Chat said, what the student is interested in. And when a school is reading that application, they're really only looking at a small component in terms of the student as an entire person. And so showcasing the student's additional interest and additional personality really helps a school admissions office to determine how the student will fit in that particular school. So we touched on this a little bit with Daniel, but one of the other questions that we had related to recommendations is, do you have any advice on how students should choose what teacher they should ask for a recommendation?
Sure. So when I talk to students about selecting teachers, I advise them to find that person earlier rather than later to give them enough time to write that great narrative, but to also find people who will be their strongest advocate in this process. So who will have those stories about how you thrived in the classroom, who you are as a community member or as a peer to other students in that class or at the school. So teachers who maybe challenged you, who saw you grow, who could highlight all of those things, that will provide more information that, again, would otherwise not be there. So don't choose someone just because they have a fancier title or maybe graduated from the school you're hoping to attend. Don't choose someone just because they gave you the best grades. Find someone who really knows you, can pull out those stories because they've seen so many of them and have a bit more to work with. So that typically is my recommendation.
And I would agree with what Jessica just said. I ditto that. And I tell the students, I said, you know, look outside of the box. You just don't want to ask the teacher whose class where you made the A, because that teacher may not really know you that well, and maybe you haven't made that connection. Look at maybe a teacher or a class where you had some struggles, you had some challenges, you were able to overcome them. That could be an interesting letter and offer more perspective than just a class you sat in and you were punctual and you turned in your work and you happened to get an A.
And also having a teacher that knows about your extracurriculars and knows about what you do outside the classroom also doesn't hurt, because they can paint a more holistic story about your experience in high school. So along with whatever struggles that Chat was talking about, and then they overcome those struggles, you can say, along with that, they were doing all these other great things. And here's how they also overcame struggles in those areas that I know about, because I was able to get close with that teacher. One thing, and Jessica, you can chime in on this. One thing that I know my professors told me while I was in college, was how much they really wanted to get to know their students and get to know what they're like. So seeing that potential for a student to be able to develop those relationships with their teachers is something that I think might be important also.
So we have a number of viewers, who have since joined our QuestCast. So just to let everybody know, we're going through a number of questions that are related specifically to how you can support your students. There are also questions that are coming up on the right-hand side that we're going to address if we have time, so keep an eye out on those. One more question having to do with recommendations. We have a lot of teachers that say that they're writing recommendations for a number of programs, for a number of students, and then for a number of programs. Do you have any recommendation to the educators in terms of how to juggle the requests for multiple recommendations from each of many students?
Well, that is a tough one, and I am definitely sensitive to all of the responsibilities and expectations that our teachers have. I conduct a college meeting the second semester of the junior year with students and parents, and at that time we discuss which two teachers they would like to ask to be their recommenders, and I encourage them to get that commitment during the springtime and not wait until the fall. Some students do, many of them do, and as I said, the teachers are probably not going to be writing your letters of recommendations in the next 2 weeks, but gets that commitment. As a counselor, because we have a small senior class this year, we have only 67, I do write all of my letters in the fall. So one way perhaps teachers can juggle this, and I know that, you know, the summers are really sacred, but if you know those 8, 9, or 10 students that you really have a close connection with, and if you could write those letters during the summer, I think that would save you a lot of stress and anxiety in trying to get those done during the school year.
One of the things that we also recommend is, since the teachers have to submit the recommendations for QuestBridge so early, that if they can, instead of writing a recommendation particularly to one college, they can write to Dear Admissions Committee in general, so that they can use those recommendations because when the students rank, the same recommendation letter will go to all of the colleges where the student has ranked, and so rather than writing specifically to one particular school, that same recommendation letter will be used at all of the different colleges. So you're not writing a different recommendation letter for each of the schools where the student has decided to rank. So moving on to kind of general questions about QuestBridge and the QuestBridge process and experience. What can educators look for when they are looking to see whether students might be a good fit for QuestBridge? So when they're looking through their roster either junior year or the beginning of senior year and trying to decide who they're going to share information about the QuestBridge process with, what should educators be looking for?
So I think one of the big things for educators to look for in terms of Quest Scholars, in terms of potential Quest Scholars, is, first of all, do they have the grades? Are they getting high enough SAT scores? Because by the time, a lot of the times it happens September of senior year, you're identifying these students. I know I'm at a school right now where they're still having trouble identifying students their junior year and getting them to move forward. So that whole process is very complex, but past the grades, as teachers, what we can do is we can see which students exhibit the qualities, the really good qualities of a Quest Scholar, which I think we're going to be talking about a little bit more in the later in the talk. But there are certain qualities about students that you should be looking for, like if your student has a very high character, that's something to look for, and if they're expressing that and they seem to have really good grades, and of course if they qualify the income requirements, you should be definitely telling that student about the scholarship. And don't be discouraged. So if you're an educator at a very high-performing school where a lot of students are in the 3.5 to 3.7 range or even higher, don't be discouraged to tell that student with a 3.5, even though they might be low for your school. That's still a student who would be a very powerful applicant in the Quest pool and should be told to apply.
So a couple of things I think from the admission standpoint, just as institutions might advise students and families, find schools that are a great fit, I think there's also a fit for QuestBridge. So making sure that a student who's seeking these opportunities or pursuing the application their senior year, that it makes sense for them to do so. So if the student maybe is not quite sure if they're prepared to ask all teachers for those letters of recommendation, fill out those short answers and essays, then maybe they need to take the time to apply later on and still use the application, maybe not for the match. Maybe just apply to colleges as they take their testing or take the time to think about what they want, because that's the first time we're going to see that student as an applicant typically. So if it's not going to be the strongest application, then maybe it's better for them to take a bit more time. Also, QuestBridge is an amazing program, but the application, I think, does reflect the objectives and intent of the program in terms of greater access, but also providing colleges as well as students the opportunity to express more about their achievements or their background that we might not otherwise see. So again, for students to be thoughtful about, is this how I want to present myself? Is this additional information what I'd like to share with colleges? And am I in a place where I can thoughtfully put together a strong application that is reflective of my achievements, but also what I hope to pursue? So it's a lot, I know, to digest as counselors who are working with students, but also for students at this time, but to make sure that fit does make sense.
So Daniel touched on this a little bit, but I would love to hear from each of you if you could give an example of one or two students who have gone through or are currently going through, or who are currently successful Quest Scholars. What traits do they demonstrate? Obviously, everybody has unique capabilities, but like Daniel said, strong character is one example of something that we're looking for. If you could share some students that are either in the process of, that are current Quest Scholars in college and what sort of attributes they have.
Well, one that comes to mind, and he is not a Quest Scholar. He did make finalist, and I know that he would have been matched. However, he wanted to go early decision at a local school, but his profile, number one in the class, although we don't rank, 4.0, full IB diploma student, ACTs in the 30s, and hearing impaired since the age of 3, and turned down an IEP. So he demonstrated independence, perseverance, a strong work ethic, and someone who was not going to use any challenges or disabilities as a crutch. And so it's hard to describe a Quest Scholar, but it's that person that has that little extra something something. And as I say, we may have a lot of scholars, and a lot of scholars who may be talented, low income, but Quest Scholars, Daniel, are like rock stars.
I would agree with that. Quest Scholars are definitely like rock stars. And while I was at Northwestern, I was president of the Quest Scholars Network there. So I got to work with hundreds of Quest Scholars every year. And the ones that come to mind, not to name any offhand, but the ones that come to mind are always the ones who are interested in helping others achieve what they want to do and helping others get out of the situation that they might be in that might be detrimental for them. So those who want to work in soup kitchens, those who want to go and work in impoverished neighborhoods, those who want to go and work and do something altruistic with their time are the ones that also had leadership positions and organizations at the university were the ones who were able to keep up with their grades, who were able to keep a positive attitude while they were there. And one of the biggest things, especially for low-income students going to these elite universities, you should definitely look and see if, when you're looking at students to choose to apply to Quest, something that definitely makes them more successful in college is resilience, and the ability to bounce back when you fail. And those qualities are the ones that I saw while I was working with Quest Scholars that really resonated and really showed that they were successful and that they were persevering through college.
I think just building off what has already been said, especially what Chad had mentioned about the student that she had worked with, students, I think, tend to have almost an innate curiosity and drive and eagerness to pursue what they're truly interested in, whether it's an academic interest or this desire to help out, their family or their community, and that comes through in all these lovely aspects throughout the application, in both the QuestBridge application but also our own. So I think that does tend to be a common thread in terms of who we're seeing through this process, and is also reflected in the students who are named scholars.
I like the idea that there's a little bit of something extra. So we heard about, resilience, independence, perseverance, helping others, the idea of being altruistic, but also taking on leadership roles. And it goes back a little bit to what Jessica was talking about earlier. Our QuestBridge application is due very early, and there are a lot of components, and sometimes that can be very overwhelming for students. But the positive, one of the big positives of having such an involved application is that there are a lot of places where not only can you share about your experiences, but you can share about your leadership, you can share about any sort of struggles like Chat mentioned, or actually like Daniel mentioned also in terms of being resilient, talking about what sort of struggles a student has gone through, and they've persevered and they've continued. So moving on into the next question, I'd like to know do you have any advice as to what educators can do when they're taking into consideration family circumstances? And what we mean by that is often students will come and ask teachers for recommendations or for help, and the teachers don't necessarily know what the family financials are, or if there's any sort of assets, any sort of savings, and that can put a teacher in an awkward place. Does anybody have any suggestions in terms of how to deal with that issue?
Well, my recommendation is that if a teacher is unsure, please consult the advisor or the counselor or the college counselor. During the second semester of the junior year, I submit a questionnaire to the students and the parents, and I ask, are there any extenuating circumstances that may have impacted academic achievement? And they're pretty upfront with that. And if they choose not to write about it, when we are in that college meeting, that usually does come up. Thankfully, I have a list of students who qualify for free or reduced lunch, so I can verify that they meet that criteria. However, I did get burned a couple of years ago when a student was on my free or reduced lunch list, and he was a phenomenal young man, and I recommended QuestBridge for him. And I said, now, you are on free or reduced lunch, right? Correct. So he went through the process, but he failed to tell me that the fact that he lived with his father, who had limited income, that his mother was in corporate America making over $100,000 a year, and that income had to be reported. So after he had submitted his application and I, found that out, it's like, oh my gosh. Unfortunately, you've already submitted your application, but I know that you're not going to qualify. So, just go further, and just because they're on a free reduced lunch list, now I'm more intentional in asking, do you have, the other parent who you maybe have an income that has an income that is substantial.
That's something that brings us to a point that comes up all the time, which is the question about free and reduced price lunch and non-custodial income. It moves towards something that we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about, but it is important to encourage your students to list both the custodial and the non-custodial income in the application because, as Chat said, that information is required, and it's ultimately required in most cases for the FAFSA and for the CSS profile as well.
And
moving in, yes.
Sorry, just to add to that, for educators who are watching this, please, even if you feel like you have a very close relationship with your students, make sure to ask them if they even know whose income they're on. I just had a student I was talking to about the Quest application, and she's living with her grandparents, one of which is unemployed, the other one not too much income, but her parents are still alive and well. She's just not with them right now, and she doesn't know whose tax return she's on. That will affect her application because her parents make quite a bit more money than where she's living. So you need to make sure that your student understands what the application is asking for, and you also should understand what the application is asking for. And although it's a little bit of an awkward conversation to have with a student, it's an important one for when they're even applying for CSS Profile, FAFSA, or the QuestBridge application, which expressly asks for that information.
All right, moving in into a slightly different direction. Jessica, we'd love to hear from you specifically, knowing what's something that many applicants overlook that admissions officers tend to like in regards to the personal statement or the application in general, and is there anything that is, or is there something that is not seen enough?
Sure. So I know there's typically a lot of anxiety when it comes to the personal statement. I think something that is overlooked is the opportunity to share something that is unique to the student that won't be anywhere else in the application. So if you look at the different pieces or required pieces of the application, the personal statements are the only areas that students have complete control over in terms of how they're presenting themselves, their own voice, and how that might be shown to us. So I think students feel like it needs to be this groundbreaking topic. So if they want to pursue science, then they should be talking about some major research breakthrough that they discovered recently, and that's definitely not the case. It's a great time for us to get a better sense of that student's voice. Again, we're looking for students who will be joining our vibrant student communities and not just studying or being in labs day in and day out. So we want to know how you'd be as a friend, as a student, how you'd interact with others. So pieces like the personal statement or essay within the application, or even those short answer prompts, give us a better sense of your personality, what makes you tick, what sparked that curiosity. So it can be maybe a simple story about growing up as a scientist, someone who's really into the quantitative side when your family is full of artists, and reconciling that. So it might touch on other aspects of your application, like your academic interests. It doesn't only have to be about that. So you don't have to duplicate something that might already be in the application. If it's already there in a different section, then use this opportunity to show us something that is not already there. So don't get too stressed out, I think, if any students are listening, any educators who are working with students. But again, it's really our only chance to get to know the students in terms of the entire application, and the essay is a way to get a sense of that personal side that might not be present otherwise.
Excellent, thank you. Moving back, there's a question that came up when we were talking from the financial side. One educator asked, regardless of who the student lives with, it is the parent's income that we are looking at. And that's an excellent question. And the answer is, it is the custodial parent and the legal guardian. Those are the people that we are interested. Those are the financial, that is the financial information that we need each student to provide. If a student is living, has decided to move out from her parents and is living, for example, with an older sibling, if the older sibling is not the student's parent or legal guardian, obviously the older sibling can't be the parent, excuse me, but if the older sibling is not the legal guardian, then the financial information for the parents still needs to be included, and if that financial information is unknown, that needs to be explained in as much detail as possible. So that's a very good question. It's going to bring us to one other question that is also financially focused, which is, it's a question we get all the time. What are the financial benefits of applying to QuestBridge? And that can be either during the rankings process and then for the match, excuse me, and then for students that are not matched and end up going regular decision. So what are the financial benefits?
Obviously, the scholarship, if you end up getting that, is a huge financial benefit. Close to 60, 70 grand a year is nothing to scoff at. But, and this is another thing to keep in mind when you're recommending students to apply to QuestBridge. And it's something I tell students all the time. If you become a finalist, just get the finalist position sometime in late October, mid-October, even if you don't get the match scholarship, you still get 36 applications, 36 colleges you can apply to for free, which I'm sure we all know is a huge weight lifted off of students who might not otherwise be able to apply to so many great schools, not just any schools, but just really great schools. And that's what I think those are the two biggest financial benefits of applying to QuestBridge.
I would agree, Daniel, and I do have students who are disappointed when they're not matched, but Jessica can, she knows that schools only have so many positions, but just because you're not matched, please, keep an open mind and be positive, because in the last 2 years, I've had students who were not matched, but they ended up at Northwestern University with substantial, financial support, and Grinnell, I can say those names, and so, they ended up just being really great and happy, and sometimes things work out, you end up where you're supposed to be. So yeah, the financial incentives are awesome.
Yeah, and just to re-emphasize that point, because anecdotes are great when giving this type of thing. I wasn't matched to Northwestern. I got in and they gave me significant aid. Yeah, just keep that in mind when applying.
Yeah, as Scott mentioned, sorry.
Go for it, Jessica.
We're not able to match with as many students as we would later on in the process, and we always admit a ton of great Quest students, whether they were finalists or not. And a lot of the partner schools have great financial aid policies where they're really committed to supporting students who they admit. So at Columbia, for example, we'll fully match all need with no loans packaged in. A lot of the partner schools have great financial aid policies, so even if they're not matched, we're excited to see you apply, we're excited to have you on campus, and that will follow through in terms of financial aid.
That's an excellent point, and I like the stress that even if the student is not matched, in many, literally hundreds of cases, we have students that end up enrolling, receiving tremendous financial aid and enrolling in our partner institutions. Everybody talks about the match, and it is extraordinarily exciting, and it is a huge deal, but it's not the only way to end up with full aid if that does not happen for the student. moving in a slightly different direction, every now and then there are students that are going to approach you that say that they're interested in applying to QuestBridge, and either for financial or academic reasons, you don't think that they are a good fit. Do you have any recommendations in terms of how to address that issue with the student?
Well, financially, QuestBridge is pretty clear about what, the financial threshold would be. Like I said, in the case of my student a couple of years ago, it was my fault that I didn't get the entire financial picture. But first, especially to validate that, and that's pretty statistical in nature. But what I do in terms of not being a good match, perhaps academically or some other ways, keeping other Quest scholars' identity confidential, I do share profiles. This student, is a Quest scholar. However, this student is not, and it's not that I'm saying that they're not Quest material, but I'm just sharing profiles, and then I will allow them to make that decision. I would never say no or discourage them. I just want them to see, the reality of it. Just like I wouldn't tell a student, no, don't apply to Columbia University or another school. It's a decision that they have to make.
Personally, when I speak with students, if it's a economic thing, a financial thing, then there's nothing really you can do about that. They don't meet the financial threshold. That is very, I agree with Chad, it's very well laid out on the website. But in terms of academics, so I personally don't see the problem with the student filling out the QuestBridge application and applying purely because they filled out that application. That means they're just going to be able to do the common application, which is what thousands of other colleges do easily. And when they want, if they all of a sudden in mid-October they aren't a finalist, but they know they want to apply early decision to a school or something, their application's basically done. I don't see a real problem in that. So in terms of academics, yeah, they might not have the best chance of getting the finalist position, and yes, it will be kind of disheartening to hear that he didn't get through the first round. But if you can really spin it for the student and show them, hey, you've done all this work already. You don't have to do this work anymore. You can now just apply. That in itself is very empowering, and also allows you to say, well, let's look at your application, let's edit it. It's almost like you went through a mock round if you didn't get the finalist position. That now you can go back and you can say, hey, this is what your application looks like through this. Let's see how we can make that application better now. So just like Chad, I would never discourage a student to apply, and actually say it as a positive thing. Say it as, you just finished your college application, a college application that's a lot more thorough than the common application, before you even have to start applying to other colleges. Now you can reuse that essay if you need. You can reuse all of those activities that you generated that you didn't know that you were supposed to put on the application, you know to put on now. There's so many things that go into the application, and it's so fresh in my mind because I was just going through this 2 days ago, where there are all these little nuanced things that you don't think about until you start filling out that application that may stress you out in the moment, that if you just do it for the QuestBridge application, you're that much more prepared to do it for when you actually have to do the, for when you might have to do the regular one.
Daniel, thank you. Just listening to you, I think I have a paradigm shift now. So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Daniel, I like that you brought that up as well, because we get questions all the time as to why our application is due so early. And the reason that it is due so early is exactly what you explained, which is the students find out in the middle of October if they were a finalist or not, which means that if they are a finalist, they have time to submit all of their materials for the ranking process. If they are not a finalist, then they have already, in essence, completed the majority of the common application before the beginning of November. And so that's very purposeful. It's not to make counselors and teachers and students work all over the summer as much as to make sure that students get a head start, because so many of the students that we work with did not necessarily are the first in their family to go to college. So to help them get set up can be very useful. I'm seeing a lot of questions that are coming up in the question box. We're not ultimately going to get to all of them, but if there are questions that you think would be useful to answer, please select upvote them, and they'll move to the top of the screen, so we'll see which ones those are. Moving to part of the question that I asked a moment ago had to do with the financial component, and one of the things that you should know that is also very apparent on our website is when we're looking for students, they're low income, it's both their family's income, custodial and non-custodial, as well as any equity in assets. And so I've had educators in the past that have said, chat kind of similar to what you were talking about, the student qualifies for free or reduced price lunch, and then they find out, an educator finds out later that they have a tremendous amount of savings, or they own a home and property that is completely paid off. So those are a couple of financial concerns that don't necessarily come out in the beginning, but is one way that they might not be financially eligible for QuestBridge in the end. As Daniel said, however, even if they're not as a finalist, the work that they've done, the essays that they've written, the recommendations that have already been written, those can still be utilized through the common application. So we have a couple more questions, moving in a bit of a different direction, again, talking about the standardized test scores. So Jessica, I would love to know how standardized test scores play into the admissions process, and what should an educator, tell a student who has lower standardized test scores but otherwise seems like a strong candidate?
Sure. So this is a question that I think probably every admissions office gets a lot. I think the test requirement or component is just one of those pieces that we use to assess a student's academic potential for that reason. Some students might not test well for whatever reason, whether it's broader context or what school pedagogy they are used to, so they might not do as well on the standardized testing, and that is something that we understand, which is why we look at the academic record, we look at what classes that student has taken, how they're doing, along with those letters from a counselor and teachers to really round out how a student functions in that classroom setting, how they've grown. So testing really is one piece that's looked at in conjunction with other academic components, and then that is also looked at with the personal side, because again, students will not just be taking tests once they're in college, they're doing a whole lot of other things. So it's one small component. So if you look at, especially for the partner schools with QuestBridge, our mid 50% range of admitted students, along with the finalist profile that QuestBridge has on their own site, it's a pretty wide range, and I think you see that because we're looking at these other factors that are really compelling when we're looking at what type of student we might want to admit. On the flip side, there are also schools that are maybe test optional, or we'll look at other pieces in place of standardized testing, so in place of the SAT or ACT. So if you do have high achieving, fantastic students who you want to encourage, and you know that they might not test well, or they're not doing better and they're feeling maybe dismayed from that process, there are a huge range of schools who are either holistic or will allow students to submit something else in place of the SAT or ACT. So there are options. But on the admission side, we understand that students might not test well, or that there are other pieces that we should look at more closely to see how they do on campus.
And we spoke a lot about this in the beginning, but that's one of the benefits of having the recommendation, because a teacher could actually write in and talk about how strong the student is, and maybe even note that that student, is a weak test, is a weak test taker. Chat, did you have something to add to that?
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
No problem. So when we do have a variety of schools that QuestBridge partners with, there are 36 of the partner colleges. When students are this is really for everyone, when students are deciding which colleges to apply to, what factors do you think they should consider, and how can we as educators support them in this stage of the college application process?
There are so many different factors to consider. I think I'm just going to state the ones that usually don't get talked about, at least in my experience. Location. I understand that one college may have the perfect academic programs, but if you're a city kid and it's in the middle of nowhere and you don't know how to drive, it may not be the best place for you. If you're used to warm weather every day during the year and you're very comfortable with that, and I'll just use my college as an example, and you want to go to Northwestern, you have to be comfortable with being cold for 10 months out of the year. So that's one really big thing. And then if I think of any others, I'll come back to it. But that's the biggest thing, I think, is just you're going to be living there for 4 years. And yeah, you'll go back and forth maybe between your home and where you're going to college, but you're going to be there for 4 years. You should be happy with where you're going to be living.
And I definitely agree with that. You know, some of the criteria I recommend that students research: size, location, major programs, financial support. But I tell students that, now is the time to be totally selfish, or I guess maybe self-focused is a better way to put it. And what you should do is probably start asking those philosophical questions of why you want to go to college in the first place. How is going to college, how will that make you a better person? How will the experience of attending college contribute to you being a better person? And what kind of a person do you want to be when you graduate? And how will that specific institution help support those goals?
I think, college is a great opportunity to be challenged, to be exposed to different viewpoints, different areas of study, different types of food, so a huge range of new experiences. But I think, you have to think as a student about what you need to thrive and to do well. So what are the support networks you might need? So tied to that are, who is around you? What's the environment? Do you need a city? Do you need an urban location, or do you want a quieter area? What kind of intimacy do you need? So do you want smaller classroom settings where you can talk to faculty? Or if you're going to be in a small setting and asked to speak up every class period, and that's really stressful and you don't do well in that, then that should also play into what kind of school you're looking for. So for students to definitely be excited about new experiences and challenges, but also to be honest about what they would need to do their best possible work during those 4 years and after.
Excellent. And speaking about best possible work and supportive schools, we would love to hear why Columbia partners with QuestBridge. It's a question that comes up all the time. There are, we have so many phenomenal schools, and why decide to partner with QuestBridge as well?
Sure. So Columbia's always been truly committed to diversity of really every kind. So diversity of talents and interests, racial ethnic diversity, and then also socioeconomic diversity. And QuestBridge's mission is to really support high-achieving students who may have faced economic challenges or are from low-income backgrounds. And I think it has really allowed a lot of students and educators to take a closer look at universities in different parts of the country or different types of institutions that might not have been on their radar. So I think we always see this throughout the process, whether students are applying for the match or sticking through for regular decision. So I think it falls in line very much with providing access to students and supporting them in different ways. And we certainly are seeing that translated in who is applying to us, but also what we are able to learn through the QuestBridge application that, again, we wouldn't see otherwise, whether it's from teacher recommendations or from the short answers that students are submitting to us. So it's one of the reasons that we decided to partner with QuestBridge and are very happy to be a partner school.
And we are very happy that you continue to be a partner school, and we send a number of students to Columbia every year, and they seem to be very, very happy. The last thing as we're closing out that I would like to ask all of our panelists is if you could give one piece of advice for the educators in terms of how they can support high-achieving, low-income students as they apply through QuestBridge to the colleges of their dreams. What advice would you give to the educators that are viewing our panel today?
If there's one piece of advice I would give is that high-achieving low-income students are are so unique in my opinion because they're these extremely bright, motivated students who, in varying levels, don't have the level of cultural capital that we have because we went to college, whether we were low income or not. And that cultural capital allows us to navigate that application in a way that those students can't. And even as simple as saying, here's the information that they want you to put here, and sitting down with them and actually just looking at the application with them is more than enough to get them to realize what they need to do to apply. Because that's the really interesting thing here. It's these students who are extremely motivated and are they're go-getters. They're just going to go and they're going to do the things they need to do, but they need to know what to do first. The same way we inform our instruction with trying to instigate prior knowledge and give them the correct tools to succeed in our classrooms, that same thing needs to happen in the application process for those students, especially those students, because they're not going to get that information, or very few of them are going to get that information from anywhere else. Just yesterday, at the school I was working at last year, I encountered a student. She told me she wanted to go to Dartmouth, and another thing, like another student last year I was teaching, she told me Stanford. And they're telling me these really great schools, yet none of the students in that school has ever taken an SAT-2. So them applying to those schools, it just won't happen for them. And even just having that brief interaction of me telling them to have that SAT-2 wasn't enough. So actually sitting down with them and being like, listen, you need to do this test date, go and do it. And it wasn't until I did that with some of the students that they actually decided, okay, I really need to do this. Like, you need to show them that this is just how the system is run. And even though colloquially we all know that we need to take the SAT, for the colleges on the QuestBridge site, not all of them, but a good amount, and just so they get all the opportunities that the scholarships could give them, showing them that these other things are a requirement for this select bunch of colleges is something very important and something that will make or break that student when going through that application process.
Research shows that the population of low-income talented students have a tendency to under-apply. That means that they may apply to 2 or 3 colleges, and probably they're public and they're in-state. But by encouraging them to go through the QuestBridge process, a door is opening up, and they can look at all of the possibilities. And some of the schools that are QuestBridge partner schools, they may not have even heard of, but they look at these schools, they start researching, and you tell them that it is a possibility, that there is a way to bridge the gap between the haves and the have-nots. And you've got financial support and academic support on these campuses. So, just open their eyes to the possibilities of what could be.
I think building on that, 17% of our students are first generation and their families to attend college. And it's not just our first years who I'm meeting their first couple of months on campus. It's students who are seniors who are still questioning, did you mean to admit me? Do I deserve to be here? And I think the answer is absolutely yes. not just here, but so many of our schools would have been so lucky to have you. I think, when I'm reading applications, I feel fortunate to learn more about the student and to hopefully welcome you in the fall. So I think to encourage students to really, as Chat mentioned, to open their eyes to so many opportunities that are awaiting them, to take that leap, to encourage them to not just apply, but to really see themselves at our institutions, that we want them here, we'll support them in so many ways, and that they more than deserve this. So to help them see that for themselves throughout the process, we hope to help them see that once they're on our campus. But I think the senior year of really applying to schools, feeling comfortable doing so, and then saying yes to us when we admit them can be a huge leap for them. So just to help them out through that process.
And just to emphasize Jessica's point a bit about students not believing that they they were really admitted to that college by their senior year. I still don't believe that Northwestern admitted me in good faith. And that's not to say that I didn't have a great time there and I didn't make the most of it. It's to say that this is really a mindset that low-income students have. And it's something that, when I worked with the hundreds of Quest Scholars at Northwestern, was a very overall mindset. It's something that we may have, but we really do deserve it. And it's something that only you as educators are going to be able to get them to even minutely see that they deserve the opportunities that are afforded by Columbia and all the other great Quest schools on that list.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your input and your participation. For everybody that has been viewing this, if you would like to replay it, or if you would like to go back to the beginning, we kind of meandered around, but we started talking about recommendations and then kind of moved to how you could support your students, and then the financial components as well. You're able to look on our YouTube page, or also you can go back to this link and replay the QuestCast. If we did not answer your question, please feel free to email us at educators@questbridge.org, and I will make sure to answer any questions that we were not able to get to. But thank you to our panelists for taking time out of the beginning of the school year, which is the craziest part, and then also for all the teachers and educators that have been viewing, because we really could not do this work without you, and your students would not be able to apply or would not be able to be inspired to know that they do deserve these opportunities without you. So thank you to everybody, and have a wonderful Labor Day weekend. And like I said, any additional questions, you can email educators@questbridge.org or questions@questbridge.org. So have a good afternoon and good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.